Last week on Monday, I showed you a story where the United States had said it had curtailed its shipment of interceptor missiles to Ukraine. One of the reasons why, according to Ambassador Whitaker that we played on the show, was that we don't have enough. We have to take care of our needs first. This is what America First was, etc. Then later in the week, on the 3rd of July, we had Sean Parnell explaining exactly why we're doing what we're doing. And he's claimed over and over that it wasn't because we didn't have enough, actually, as some people implied, but it was because we had set certain defense priorities. We were maintaining America first. But then he made an emphatic statement. He said, I want to make sure everybody is crystal clear. This is not because we don't have enough. We have everything we need to fight every war everywhere in the world. Period. We are the most lethal fighting force on the planet. That's what he said. There was something about that that really got my attention here. And the more I've thought about it, this time it's getting a little bit more dangerous. And I want to explain to you why that is. It's bad enough to just be arrogant and have a lot of hubris, etc., because we know, even according to the Bible, that pride comes before the fall. We don't want to fall. Just a general truism. But we're starting to see the manifestation of the reality seeping across the board here in ways that I think at both the leader level, the military level, and at the highest level, the commander-in-chief level, I think that we're having a growing problem of perception and arrogance that could lead to really bad decisions at some point in the future. And if we don't get these things fixed right now, it may be too late later on when a genuine crisis actually arrives. So first of all, let's take a look at what Marco Rubio said. Let's go back a little bit further, kind of set the stage for why this issue is as important as it is. In Senate testimony on May the 20th, Marco Rubio was asked about air defense interceptor missiles and how many we have.
Everything that's been approved and congressionally appropriated is ongoing. In fact, to the extent that the Ukrainians have asked for anything additional, what they've asked for is air defenses, Patriot units, which frankly we don't have. But we are working closely with our NATO allies. There are NATO allies that do have some batteries of Patriot missiles that they could provide or transfer over to the Ukrainians to defend, for example, the airspace of Kyiv and other places. And we've been encouraging in that front and working alongside our partners there to get deliveries of some of these systems. As you can imagine, none of these countries want to give up their Patriot systems either.
So we called that out at the time, and he was right. He was telling the truth here. We don't have the Patriot interceptor batteries to give. And not only do we not have the interceptors, the interceptor or the batteries themselves are some importance. But what the absolute critical issue is the volume of interceptor missiles. Because you can have 50 batteries, but if you don't have enough missiles for them to use, then they're meaningless. So the bigger issue is the interceptor missiles themselves that go along with the batteries. So we're probably low on both of those. So that was the stage a month and a half ago. And then closing in on actually 2 months ago. Now then we have the President of the United States. First of all, we can only assume that he approved at the first of last week that said we're halting deliveries of air defense interceptor missiles, along with 155 millimeter shells and some other categories. But the biggest one was the air interceptor missiles, because that's what Zelensky has been begging for almost on a daily basis, and more as Russia's air war continues to get bigger. Well, on Air Force One, on the 4th of July, the president was also talking about the recent, at that time, what was a record number of air missiles and drones being used against Ukraine. It was overnight at that time. There's 550 air missiles and other kinds of drones that were fired in a single night. And he was asked again about this issue of interceptor missiles and would we give any.
Mr. President, Putin has not agreed to a ceasefire. Do you think he's mocking you?
No, I don't think he is. I think he's worried about sanctions. I do think he's very worried about sanctions. And, we're determining that the Senate, as you know, has put in big sanctions, very big sanctions.
You want to see Patriot missiles go into Ukraine?
Well, they need them for defense. I mean, I don't want to see people killed. And they're going to need them for defense. They're amazingly effective. We knocked out 14 out of 14. That's pretty amazing. If you think of it, it's almost incredible. But we knocked out 14 out of 14. So they're going to need something because they're being hit pretty hard.
Are you going to send them, though? Are you going to send more?
Yeah, we We might. We're looking at it.
So you hear that last part there. Are you going to send more interceptor missiles? Yeah, we might. We're looking at it. So the United States is considering that. Now, we've talked in our show yesterday that there's a possibility that there's some kind of backdoor negotiations going on, that perhaps the U.S. would give some interceptor missiles for a period of time before Ukraine ends martial law and agrees to have an election. I have serious doubts that would happen. Zelensky doesn't seem anywhere near interested in doing that. We won't have to wait much longer. I think 9 days before the current term runs out, and they either have to extend it or they have to allow it to lapse. We'll see what's on that. But that's a secondary issue. The primary thing is that we are still considering giving away our air defense interceptor missiles. That was on the 4th of July that President Trump said that. On the 3rd of July, that's when we had this comment by Sean Parnell. Now, he's going to start off by talking about what America's defense priorities are and what we're doing, et cetera. And then he's going to get to what I think is the crux and the alarming part of his statement to me toward the back end to this. Watch this clip.
The Department of Defense continues to provide the president with robust options regarding military aid to Ukraine, consistent with his goal of bringing this tragic war to an end. And at the same time, the department is rigorously examining and adapting its approach towards achieving this objective while also preserving U.S. military readiness and defense priorities that support the president's America First agenda. This capability review, and that's exactly what it is, it's a capability review, is being conducted to ensure U.S. military aid aligns with our defense priorities. And we will not be providing any updates to specific quantities or types of munitions being provided to Ukraine or the timelines associated with these transfers. I mean, we see this as a common sense, pragmatic step towards having a framework to evaluate what munitions are sent and where. But we want to be very clear about this last point. Let it be known that our military has everything that it needs to conduct any mission, anywhere, anytime, all around the world. We have the most lethal fighting force in the world. If you need further proof of that, look no further than Operation Midnight Hammer and the total obliteration of Iran's nuclear ambitions there.
All right. A little bit of balance is necessary here, a little bit of context so that we can put some of his words into an understanding of just how much is just blather and how much may be accurate. Well, let's start off with what he said first. He said the president's decision to limit some of these weapons, and they're doing this analysis, and he kept emphasizing that it was an ongoing process to analyze what our stockpiles are, how much do we have of all these different weapons categories, anything that you would need to fight wars. How many that we may need in a given situation, how fast we can produce them, especially if we get into a war, all those things. That all goes into part of that analysis. He said, that's good. That's exactly what we should be doing. That should be on a continual basis, but sometimes you need to do it on an even more concentrated basis. And we're definitely in a situation like that right now. So that part is good. We're doing that kind of analysis. He said that this is all to be focused on the president's America First agenda. Now, that is something, as you know, if you've been watching our show for any amount of time, I'm completely in favor of. That's exactly what it should be. That should be self-evident that every nation is supposed to look out for its needs first. That's the reason why we have government. Every nation has a government to look for their needs first, to take care of their people, to provide them with an economic opportunity, and to keep them safe, whether that's domestically or internationally. That is like the core functions of any government. Your country, your nation, not somebody else's nation, our nation. So if you're analyzing all of our stockpiles, all of our war plans, all of the contingencies, all the simulations for what would happen if you get into a conflict somewhere, how much ammunition would you need, how much can you produce, how can you get it there, what are your transportation capabilities, et cetera. If you do all that, then you have to say, all right, what do we need in order to make sure that we can execute these missions if we need them? And whatever that number is, you can't go below it. Meaning you can't say, well, I want to help this guy because I like him over here. He's getting hit, but this is the line here. once we get to this point, we just can't go any further. That's what it means to be America first. That's what it means. One of the other things she mentioned there was to set the defense priorities. As you may know, I work for an organization called Defense Priorities, and it comes from that exact thought. You have to prioritize what you do because you can't do everything you want. You have to prioritize for your defense. And so that's exactly what he said that we're doing. Now, if that's the case, terrific. But then you have to say, it doesn't look like that's what we're actually doing. It looks like we're doing the analysis. It looks like we at least have some on paper understanding of what this situation is. But then wherever this line ends up, seems to me that we're in danger of going beneath it. Consider that on that May 20th, the commentary from Secretary Rubio, that came let's see, I think it was about 2 weeks before after the United States had ended its military operations against the Houthis in the Red Sea. And one of the reasons we claimed is, we succeeded and they begged for a ceasefire, so we gave it to them, et cetera. The real reason, almost certainly, is because we realized it was a losing proposition. You saw Larry Johnson on our show many times talk about how we had no chance to succeed with this. The Saudis didn't for a decade prior to this. The Israelis were trying to, and no one could. You were expending just huge amounts of missile and firepower, and the Houthis just would not go away. They would not quit what they were doing. So it would have been foolish to continue going down that path. So I gave President Trump props for coming to that conclusion and ending that conversation. But that came after an extraordinary amount, both dollar-wise and inventory-wise, many, many missiles, both offensive and defensive, that we used in the process of that. So that was 2 weeks prior to Rubio talking about we don't have any Patriot baddies to give away. Now then, after that period, we had the so-called 12-day war. We'll see if it ends up being 12, but that's what they're calling it right now, between Israel and Iran. And we know that from what the U.S. has publicly admitted is that we were participating with Israel in helping to defend against incoming missiles. So there was all kinds of air-to-air missiles. There was certainly lots of the THAAD missiles on the ground, air defense interceptors from Patriots, PAC-3, several other kinds of things, the David Sling, the Iron Dome, all those kinds of things. This integrated air defense systems that was sapping the strength out of both Israel and the United States. So after that whole 12-day thing preceded Ambassador Whitaker's statement on Monday a week ago, where he admitted, we have to look after our needs first. So okay with all that up to this point, but then comes the problems. So then Parnell wants to shift to, I guess he's foreseeing the obvious question is, wait a minute, if we have to look after America's priorities and we're stopping shipments of these categories to Ukraine, that would imply that we don't have enough. And so to try to forestall that, he seems to want to reassure people. And so he says, listen, let's be crystal clear about something here. He says, we have everything we need to fight any kind of war anywhere in the world. We have the most lethal fighting force in the world. Okay, that's wrong. I don't know if it's just self-deception or intentional, but it's a lie. It's untrue. We don't have the most lethal force on the planet. Demonstrably, we don't. And we'll get to his example in a second. But the first part there is that the idea, even with none of this stuff, even if there hadn't been a Red Sea operation, even if we hadn't had a 12-day war, even if we weren't fighting Ukraine or supplying Ukraine, rather, even if none of those things were happening, it is nonsense to suggest that we can fight anywhere in the world and we have everything that we would need. I mean, we have done numerous simulations. Let's just take the China-Taiwan situation just by itself. We know from computer simulations we don't have anywhere near enough for that one conflict in the Indo-Pacific area. We don't have it. We would run out of many stocks of air defense interceptor missiles for our naval forces within weeks, folks. And I think I've told you the air interceptor missile production capacity is probably less than 700 per year for us. You can go through that in a heated afternoon if you get a lot of incoming missiles from an enemy force. And obviously, even according to the simulations, if not a day, a matter of days, in just a few weeks, a couple of weeks, actually. I think in one of the simulations talked about there. And then there's the issue of getting them back. And so you don't have the industrial capacity to ramp that up. It simply doesn't exist. I think we went from 500 to 6 something since 2022, because we have tried to expand it a little bit because of what the Ukraine side needs. But it's incremental. It's not enough to fight a war there. And then to say that, yeah, we can do anything everywhere in the world that we might have a conflict. I mean, that's just self-evidently untrue. So if you believe your press there, if you believe what you're trying to convey to people, that is a dangerous situation, because you have senior leaders at the Pentagon that are potentially getting us involved all over the place. You know, we still are nibbling around the edges of the Russia-Ukraine war, and even a mistake, a miscalculation, anything could draw us in there. You know that Volodymyr Zelensky wants nothing more than to draw the United States and the entire Western ally alliance into this war. He loves to do that. He's been begging for some version of that from the beginning. So that danger always exists. And as long as that war goes on, it will continue to exist, which is one of the reasons, aside from preserving the life of the Ukrainian people, to see them, to end the possibility of them being pointlessly killed every day. That's been my number one driver. But the number two is right behind it, is that I don't want to keep alive the possibility that we get into a conflict with Russia, because there's so many things that you can't foresee, that I can't foresee right now, which historically, many things that have led to wars in the past, no one foresaw at the time. And this series of events, and a crisis happens here, a spark explodes over on the other side, and all of a sudden people are at war who had no interest in being at war. It's a classic case was World War I. Nobody wanted war on the continent, and yet this series of escalating events and just bad luck turned into the First World War. So that kind of thing is an ever-present possibility, because humans are an ever-present reality, and sometimes we make irrational and foolish decisions. And that's been throughout the millennia of human history. That's just the nature of war. So I'm concerned about that. We need to get that off the table. But we also have to be aware of, look, even if we get into a war that's something that's new, something that's all over the horizon we can't even see right now, something that doesn't even exist right now, and you look at your capacity here, you don't have the capacity to fight and wage a sustained war. We don't have it. And this is one of the problems that I have, is that we have seen what happened to Russia. Russia came in. They were not prepared for a long sustained war at the beginning either. They had a plan A, that they would have this big demonstration that would make the Ukraine side, be scared and say, okay, all right, well, we can't win this war, so let's just have a negotiated settlement right away. And it looked like they were going to succeed in Istanbul in April of 22, just a couple of months in. Well, we know that didn't happen. Well, now then Russia had to spend 18 months ramping everything up to be able to fight that war. And now then they're reaping the benefits of it. And so now then they have this sustained just juggernaut that is going along at pretty slow speed in comparison to historical norms, but it's virtually unstoppable. No matter how short or fast or slow or anything else, it is just moving forward, and it has the capacity to continue to do so. And there's very little that the Ukraine side and the Western side can do to stop it. So you then need to look at the example of Russia and say, wait a minute, we don't have that capacity. We still don't have it in artillery shells. We've tried to ramp up some, but as I discovered from talking to some colleagues just last night, our production capacity is much lower than we promised it would be at this point, because of many difficulties in the production process, building factories, getting the raw materials, getting the workers, the qualified workers. All that is proven to be more difficult than we thought. So it's slowing down the increase. So it's not that good so far. Now, if you go into war and you said, oh, holy crap, now we have to fight for ourselves, and now like Russia, it's a national emergency for us, then we'll try to do that, and we'll shift all kinds of resources, and we'll do whatever it takes. But even that, as with the Russians, it took like a year and a half. So it's if you understand that reality, then that's a good thing, because then that will inform your decision when it comes to foreign policy issues and the issues of war and peace. Because if you think a war is coming and you think it's inevitable or it's an existential threat, then you will start, like today, ramping up all of your industrial capacity and bringing it up to bear. And I mean, really bring it up here, not just rhetorically or not just throwing a bunch of money, but actually doing the things necessary to bring it up. I don't recommend that. I think that's a bad idea because then you're almost making war inevitable because your opponent will, of course, see that, the classic security dilemma. They'll see you building up and getting ready, and that means Russia and or China, because they would both see that as a direct threat. Then they would also have a concurrent increase over what they're doing, even above what the Russians have already done. They would accelerate beyond that. So that's why it's a bad idea. But you also have to recognize when you're talking about things that you may do, especially with China over the Taiwan or South China Sea issues. A lot of people have all this nonsense about we should get ready to go to war with China over Taiwan, oblivious to the fact that we couldn't fight and win that war, because you can't do this on the fly, folks. If something were to happen and there would be a spark, and there's plenty of potential sparks in that region, let's just point that out, and you actually now make the foolish decision that we're going to defend Taiwan and we're going to fight with Taiwan against China, then you're signing our death warrants, because unlike what Sean Parnell said, we are not the most lethal fighting force in the world. We have power. Let me not diminish that. Don't misread what I'm saying here. We are a very powerful country. We are a very powerful military, and there's a lot of things that we can do. We can do some things that no other country on the planet can do, China and Russia. But there are definite limits, and that's the part I fear we don't understand. We have to understand there are limits to our power, that we can't do these things on the fly. And you can't get into a major war when you don't have the industrial capacity at your disposal ready to do right now. You have to limit what you're doing. So it's one thing if you're just bragging and just saying that's for a domestic audience. I think that's stupid too, but I guess you can if you want to, as long as you understand the reality underneath that we aren't the most lethal fighting force right now. You're talking about a conventional force. That's Russia right now, hands down, number one, no question about it. The very next one, and just a little bit behind it, is Ukraine. Then you can make an argument that the U.S. Might be third, but China could also be third, because they seem to be paying a lot more attention. Their industrial capacity is definitely bigger than ours and definitely paying a lot more attention. So they have a much greater capacity for that. So probably China would be third. We would be fourth. And then probably a distant fifth is everybody else in the Western world. They're way behind on that. So let's at least be honest, and hopefully behind the scenes, we're honest to ourselves, because that should inform us that we should stop short of being so cocky about threatening everybody with military power here in ways that could get us sucked into a war that we can't wage. That is why this is so pernicious and potentially dangerous. And I really, really hope that we have learned these lessons, or that we realize the reality. I don't know that we have learned a lesson. I just hope that behind the scenes we realize and recognize these realities and the limits to what we can and what we can't do, which is another big reason why we need to get the Russia-Ukraine war off the table. We need to keep the Iran, Israel, and U.S. situation ended. Let's keep that in a permanent ceasefire and then an end of war. And then let's get the Israel-Gaza situation turned off. I hope that there's a ceasefire on that. Trump said he thought he could get one this week. Remains to be seen. I certainly hope so, because getting all these conflicts off the table gives us a chance to breathe. But that's only going to be a temporary solution if we don't recognize the important things I just told you here about the limits to our power. And that should give us some sober commentary, or some sober pauses to what we think we can do. And we need to make sure that people understand that. You now do, and that's the reason why I wanted to make this show today, so you're aware of what our limitations are and how it needs to inform our foreign policy a little bit better. Thank you, folks. Appreciate you paying attention on a Sunday morning. Hope you have a good rest of your day. We'll look forward to seeing you with a good lineup this coming week on Monday on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.